And it doesn't always mean that it's going to be the right decision right away. But what I have found is that the more I can trust how I make decisions, then whether the right result, right in air quotes, result comes right off, I can look back and appreciate the lessons more. Because if I trusted that I listened to my body, or I use a lot of muscle testing, oracle card pulls, meditation. So I kind of go there more on the spiritual side. But however people can really trust their decisions, and I teach a lot of this of figuring out like, what is the method that you can look back and be like, well, it was a full body yes, or I did follow my process. So I can still feel good about it.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week, I bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Chelsea Fournier. Chelsea is a former lawyer turned intuitive business mentor and strategist. She is the founder of the Rooted Method, a signature planning process that helps sensitive, visionary entrepreneurs design businesses aligned with their lives and definition of success. Through her work at Intuitive Business by Design, Chelsea empowers the clients to honor their capacity, trust their intuition, create aligned strategy, and build systems that support sustainable growth. Congrats on the Rooted Method and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Carl. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to kind of touch on this point. I really, and I think you're the perfect person to talk about this with, where so much I think of what, especially entrepreneurs or kind of leaders, how they define success is often coming from external sources, kind of like it doesn't really align with what they really want for themselves.
Yeah.
And so when they work really hard, they do all this, put all this effort in, and they achieve something they still feel kind of empty or doesn't feel quite right, it doesn't quite fit, and they're left with this hole or hollowness. And so what is the way you recommend, or what's the way that entrepreneurs and leaders can approach this so they're able to create a success that actually feels fulfilling and is more energizing and less draining for them?
Yeah, well, this is the perfect question for me because I can tell you what not to do and then what to do. So what not to do is when I was in my, I will call it first career, many of us business owners, entrepreneurs have like the first thing we did, right? And then we move into something ideally more aligned. So when I was a lawyer, Carl, I was a really good lawyer. I did business law and intellectual property, and I really enjoyed a lot of it. But I was defining success by a bunch of shoulds. What I should do, go to law school, be top of my class, graduate early from college, like all of these shoulds that the metrics added up to look good on paper. But what I was finding is that my body was telling me it was not aligned. I was having a lot of physical health issues in my 20s, chronic health popping up, anxiety attacks. And as I started to deconstruct, like I don't recommend doing it the way that I did of like blowing up my entire life and starting over, but it really allowed me to look at how many things I'd said yes to that my intuition and my body were literally screaming no, but I was saying yes. And so, for me, a lot of my work is helping people to decondition to say, well, yeah, maybe it would look successful for you to shoot for a 6-figure year this year or a 7-figure year, but does that fit in with how you feel and realistic expectations? I know you know this, we all have different roles. We have how we show up to work or a business, but also family obligations and health issues. And I think we can sometimes compartmentalize so much that we actually set these goals and definition of success that ignores big parts of us.
Yeah, and I think it's something that a lot of even people that have gotten like further than just like their own business or in a job, but it's like they're that whole thing about saying yes too much or trying to carry too much of like the success of the business or defining the success based on external terms is a big problem for a lot of people and it makes it's kind of like the whole, you're supposed to like put your air mask on in the airplane for helping other people to keep helping other people with their stuff or saying yes to things or doing things that aren't fulfilling or taking care of themselves. And it's not sustainable long-term plan, because if you're burnt out in your body and or you have all like these health issues, then the success you're working on is not really success, because you're not going to be around to enjoy it, and like you're not going to be around to continue it, because you're going to kill yourself basically with all these issues.
Yeah, and I think there's so many different niches of business these days. There's so many specialties and subspecialties of what you can be doing, right? You can become such an expert that you're in this little vacuum comparing yourself to other people doing similar things, right? But at the end of the day, we all want sustainable success. And if what you're doing is shooting for something that, yes, maybe a colleague or a different company or a startup did achieve it, but is it going to be sustainable for you? Because that's when we see a lot of burnout happening, people having to step out of a job or, really close something down right when it was getting momentum. We see this all the time of like, oh my God, from the outside, it looked like everything was going so well. What's really going on?
Yeah, and it's funny, I've been noticing a lot of themes or kind of the similar motifs as I've been doing these episodes. And there was someone I was looking over the recording recently, and she was talking about how if you, without having that bigger picture of all the impact that what you're doing is happening, you're often unaware of these big problems underneath the surface. And it's like if you're bringing in tons of money, but your expenses are out of balance, and your bottom line is gone. And so if it seems like your business is doing great, but you're spending a lot of yourself into getting that. And so you're actually, when you look at the bottom line, you're still in the red, because to get what looks good on paper from the outside, oh my gosh, you're earning a bunch, but people can't tell, or maybe even you can't tell yourself how much the actually, I guess, cost of acquisition is hurting your bottom line. Then you're still in a bad position despite what the press release point of view might look like.
Yeah,
exactly. And so it's the same sort of like financial, like the financial situation kind of mirrors the personal health and mindset stuff, because you're still, and it might be a great way for people to think about it, is if they're having trouble wrapping their heads around how this works, is that if you're not investing enough in yourself to keep those that your own accounts balanced or in the black, then there's no way you can keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe everything is energy, and everything you say yes to, you're basically committing an amount of energy to. And many of my clients, including myself, I'm a representative of this. I have neurodivergence, chronic health issues, maybe homeschooling, have different roles than people would necessarily see just from the outside. And that's a big part of why I've created this method for me. And this won't work for every business, but I teach my rooted method to create 90-day seasons. And, some businesses might have to have stakeholders and, longer business plans, 5-year plans, 10-year plans. But when it comes to what you're saying yes to, it works for everybody to look at things in 90-day seasons, right? Everything works in seasons, whether it's change of the seasons, lunar seasons. And when we think about it, you can say, oh yeah, a year from now, I'm going to map out a whole annual plan, right? We're recording this in December. So a lot of people are doing like, oh, my next year annual plan, buying the big planner. But how many times have we sat down to plan out a whole year or 5 years? And you as a human being, right? This is all human to human, you evolve, you integrate new things. Maybe you have different life situations happen. And so you put all this energy into mapping out something for a version of you that is not going to be exactly the same. And so I find for myself, working in 90-day seasons allows me to be really honest about my capacity, about looking at my calendar and being like, oh, my son's going to be on summer break, or, just looking at the reality checks. And what I first thought was that it was going to slow me down, that it was going to feel too like frou-frou and, putting too much stock in taking care of me. But what I have found is it actually creates laser-focused priorities and discernment and leadership skills, which is a big part of what you do here through the podcast. And that it allows me to gain momentum, and not only for myself, but I see it with my clients. They gain more momentum, even though they feel like they're doing less, because sometimes it's that discernment, the trusting of bringing your own intuition and your own needs into your decisions that really brings the noise out of the fray.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you were describing that that phenomenon of people feeling like they're doing less but going further, getting more done, it's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
exact same thing that is when Steve Jobs was brought back to Apple. That classic example of they
yeah,
had like 650 plus products. He cut it down to 4, and all of a sudden they went from
yeah.
90 days from insolvency to like one of the biggest companies in the world.
Right, right.
That's
It's a good
because
trajectory.
and so the power of saying no to no, we're not
Mhm.
going to do this. We're going to stay focused on what's really important and what
Yeah,
are what we really care about and what's in alignment with who we are and what we actually want, not what the kind of flashy trend is
yeah,
and or what your competitors are doing. Um, and I think that approach, that mindset of and having that like in 90 days, what's my focus going to be? What's like the one thing?
hmm
And actually, and it's funny because people say, "What are my priorities?" And it's like, well, if you have multiple priorities, you
One.
have none because priorities there should be no
True.
plural of priority.
It's true.
Priority is one thing,
Yep.
and so the helping people have that focus and feel like they're doing fewer things, but
hmm
doing them more effectively and going
Yeah.
further with those whole thing. It's actually how you get progress instead
Yeah.
of if you're trying to if you have a bunch of people on a boat and they're all rowing in different directions, the boat doesn't
hmm
go very
Yep.
far. You
Yep.
just spin in circles.
Yeah. Well, and I find many of us have been conditioned in how we make decisions, right? When I was a lawyer, I had to make, pro con lists and, justify everything. It was conditioned out of me to just trust my instincts, intuition, whatever word really, that ping, that pull towards a yes, or when you get an invitation to something or an opportunity and you're like, oh, like how many of us have been conditioned out of listening to that and more like, make that pro con list, weigh the options, right? Justify your decision. And what I have worked on, and it's been kind of an experiment for me, is to see if I follow the intuitive pings more and more, what will happen? And it doesn't always mean that it's going to be the right decision right away. But what I have found is that the more I can trust how I make decisions, then whether the right result, right in air quotes, result comes right off, I can look back and appreciate the lessons more. Because if I trusted that I listened to my body, or I use a lot of muscle testing, oracle card pulls, meditation. So I kind of go there more on the spiritual side. But however, people can really trust their decisions. And I teach a lot of this of figuring out like, what is the method that you can look back and be like, well, it was a full body yes, or I did follow my process. So I can still feel good about it. And how can I learn from it? It takes the emotion out so much of shame and judging ourselves and guilt. And it can give you this almost like mature perspective about how to look back and be like, okay, well, this is why I said yes to that. It needed to happen this way. How can I pivot? How can I learn and bring that new knowledge into your next 90-day season?
I think what you just said there about the learning how to rely on your and trust your intuition again is something
Yeah.
that a lot of executives have like that muscle atrophy and when
Yeah.
the age of data-driven decision making, which has been a
Totally.
huge
Yeah.
buzzword for the last 2 decades of
Yeah.
there's all this data, let's just do what the data says is the right thing to do
hmm
without necessarily and they've kind of forgotten how to kind of trust their gut or trust their intuition
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
make decisions really because when you're just depending on what the data says and that's what you do, you're not really making a decision, you're just basically following the
Following the
directions of
numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
and lately, especially this year, has the data has become more like unreliable or no longer relevant or just harder to come
Mm.
by. That it's revealed that people have been leaning on that crutch for the
Oh, for
last
sure.
that crutch gets kicked out and they can't really stand anymore. They don't really, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the people making decisions because they don't have a gut to trust anymore, or they don't feel comfortable trusting their own gut.
Yeah.
And so when
Yeah.
it comes to what to do next, people are still relying on them to make these decisions, but
Mhm.
they don't know how to do it any other way than just relying on data but with again, data is no longer reliable. What are you going to do?
And with AI changing the landscape, like I think that there's going to be a clear, when you are in a path and all of a sudden there's two options. There's going to be the leaders, the CEOs, the founders who start to figure out a way to balance data, market research you can do through AI, but not forgetting that you're often the creative, the visionary who came up with the idea in the first place. And we can't replace that creativity, that connection that you had to the initial project, the vision, right? And I think we're going to see people who can welcome in, I call it welcoming intuition into the boardroom, to say, okay, I'm going to bring in methods that feel good to me, that feel supportive to me. And it might mean slowing down for a beat. It might mean allowing myself a night to meditate, like whatever your process is, but it can take into account the strategy and the data, but not making the final decision until you pass it through you, right? Like your energy, your creativity.
I think it also helps, that process helps with companies that are trying to do something innovative or new or different or stand out, because if we just go by what worked in the past, just doing iterations of the same stuff, and it's going to eventually lose effectiveness and it's going to become stale. And if you can't come up with something new, that is a new mix of something that has some like creativity and emotion and some humanity to it, eventually your content, your brand, your products are all just kind of homogenize into a level of what's been done before, and you miss out on standing out and being the kind of cutting edge in your industry. I think your process of like, well, what feels right for the leaders and help, and having some of that human vision and creativity inserted in there and the mixed with the data, so you have a balance of both, like you said.
Right. I love me a pivot table and a spreadsheet and KPI. Like I love that. And we can just take that, rely on it, like you say, a crutch. And then if something goes wrong, you can say, well, the data said it. And I think there's an element of leadership that's required to admit that you might make a wrong decision. And if you're following your intuition or you're following your self-leadership and discernment, you've got to kind of back it up with you. And that's a little bit scary in this day and age where everybody expects things to move quickly and for everything to be linear and growth to always be doubling and tripling. And, how have we gotten away from reality checks of how growth might happen if you care about it being sustainable for you and your people?
Yeah, I think that overall that kind of touched on the general mindset of always growing, always improving, no problems, and creating rebuilding the culture or the mindset in the company where you're able to take risks and you're able to have something not work out or not quite meet things like, and then course correct, allow for something like course correct, and give people the time to experiment and actually be innovative and not risk or not worry that if they try something it doesn't quite work or doesn't quite work exactly as well as expected, that all of a sudden they're a complete failure and they're like lose their job over it. Because I think there's this pressure for that's unrealistic, and especially with how uncertain things are and how quickly things change. If you don't allow some wiggle room in your expectations and your your delivery and all, like basically every aspect of the business when it comes to generating the results you want, it's then you're setting yourself up for failure. And it's, I think, another kind of symptom of the unrealistic expectations of a lot of businesses, and like especially if it's like publicly traded and stuff, just to like so and I do think that there's going to be kind of we're already kind of seeing like the breaking point of that, of where it just like you can't just keep scaling indefinitely. You can't keep it and finding the new or a new metric or a new way to measure success and way to approach this that balances intuition and the data and the pace that things are moving at, so that is going to be the way that the companies that are going to succeed kind of the ones that find that new mindset. Well,
I think also it can play into talent acquisition when you bring someone in for their creativity and their innovation, but then if there's not actually space for that, you lose talent. And A lot of my work is more with solopreneurs and speakers and authors and people where they are the brand, and then maybe they have a team behind them to get everything out there. But I do think it's a really interesting time to look at how you can create almost like subcultures. If you are listening to this and you run a department or you have a team, how can you bring a culture of welcoming in creativity and allowing mistakes, like you said, to be a part of the process if you desire innovation, if you desire retaining really talented team and having them feel appreciated and heard and seen. I think that's something that more and more people who are in corporate or working in startups, like that's what they want. They're looking for opportunities to be themselves and to flourish. And if we're not actually allowing that in the day-to-day, what does that look like for your team ongoing?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for connecting with me today, Chelsea. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please leave a review, and share it. If you want to connect with myself or Chelsea, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.